Hi, this is Bill Hitchcock, and we're going to be starting to do some work with Microsoft Access today. I've started up Microsoft Access, and the first screen that I get, I can choose to do either a blank desktop database or a custom web app. We're going to keep things simple. We're going to start with a blank desktop database, so I'll click on that. And then I want to save my file someplace, so go ahead and click on the little browse button here and decide where you want to save that. For instance, I could save this out on my C drive on my computer's hard drive. I'm going to put it in the temp directory and just give this the name of NBA 2020. I'm just going to create a fairly simple database to help me keep track of all the NBA teams and go with some different tables to help me organize all of that. So hit OK. So there it tells you where you're going to be saving your file. There's the file name. The file type is an ACCDB, an Access database. Old ones used to be called MDBs, a Microsoft database. So if you ever see that file name, you can see that. And go ahead and hit Create. And what this does is it starts up, puts you into the key object in a relational database management system, and that is the object, or I'm sorry, the table object. So what I want to do is I've got this table object open, and it kind of looks somewhat like a spreadsheet would. You've got rows going across this way, or records. You've got columns going down this way, or sometimes we'd call them fields. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this because I want to add some properties to it. So I'm going to change the view, not from datasheet view, which is kind of that spreadsheet view that I was talking about, but to design view. And as soon as I do that, it prompts me to save the name of the table. So for my table, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to set up one for conferences. I'm going to set up one for the divisions, for the teams. We could have players, we could have arenas, and so on. I'm not going to get too much into players on this one because there's so many different players that we'd have to add. But at least I can get the 30 teams that are in the NBA and try to organize those together. So we're going to start out kind of big picture, and that is the conference. So my table name is conference. Hit OK. And it puts me into design view. And there's two views with our table databases, or two purposes. One is something that's the content itself, the data itself, and that would be, in this case, my conference names. I've got the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. There's just two things. But the other part of it is something that's called the metadata, and that's the data about the data. That's all the properties of how we want to set this up. So if you look at this, it's got a little key here that says there's a primary key. Now, in general, every table that you create should always have a primary key, and that's just a unique identifier that says every single record that I have in there, they all have to uniquely be identified by something. So for example, you wouldn't want to use, if you were doing employees, you wouldn't want to use somebody's last name because you might have several employees who all have the same name of Smith. But instead you might use something like their social security number, or you'd probably come up with your own unique employee number. So for this one, I know I'm just going to have two records in it, the Eastern and Western Conference, but we want to build it up in case it ever expand and have additional conferences. So I'm going to put in CONF, some sort of a prefix that identifies that this is part of the conference table, and we could call it ID, code, whatever, some sort of abbreviation. I'm going to use conference code, and when I put in my field names, I use something that's called camel case, where we do a lowercase for the first letters of this, the prefix, but then any word that comes after it, you always capitalize the first letter, hence think of it as like humps on a camel. So I've got the conference code, then I've got my data type. The default is auto number, which is what it sounds like. It's a number field that automatically gets incremented every single record that you add. That would work all right for a primary key if you're going to have lots of records. But in this one, it's only two, so I don't want to use auto number. Instead, I'm going to use short text. Then off to the side here, it's got the description. It says it's optional, which it is, it's optional, but I would encourage you to always give some sort of a description about what this happens to be. So the first part of my description is I'm going to put in PK meaning this is the primary key, and it's the unique code for each conference. And all I really need is, for this, if you come down to the field properties, my field size on a short text field, the default field size is 255 characters. That's as big as a short text field can be. So anything from 1 to 255 characters will work. I just need one character. For the format, normally you don't have to bother entering in a format, but there's a little trick. You can put in a greater than sign, and anything that you type in here, it'll always be displayed in uppercase. So I can do that. But then finally down here where it's got the caption, it's always a good idea to put a caption in, because you don't want your users to see these internal field names like conf code and whatever else. You want them to see something short, sweet, makes it more English-like, if you will. So I'm just going to call this the CONF, short for conference. So I've got my first field done. Next we'll do the conference name. And again, short text would be appropriate for this. I've got Eastern and Western. So let's see, Eastern is 1, 2, 3, 4 for East, earn. That's 7 characters. Both of them are going to be 7 characters. We might make it a little bit longer than that. So for my field size, let's make it just 15 characters in case we'd ever expand it. Now this field happens to be an NK field, a non-key field. It's not that it's not important, it's just that it's not the unique identifier. And this is the conference name. And if you want to give them an example, for example, Eastern. And we have that. Now for my caption, I'm going to type in the word conference. And that's really all I need for this table. All right. So now that I've got that done, I'm going to change the view. Prompts me to save the table first. So I'll hit yes, I want to save that. And I can type in E for Eastern. And my conference name is Eastern. And I'm just tabbing along just like you would kind of in a spreadsheet. You can use your arrow keys to move around. I've got W and Western. I can double click between these columns and adjust the column widths if you need to. If you want to make sure that it's always sorted by the primary key, just click in that column, or you can choose the whole column and choose ascending, and it will always alphabetize them. So again, the big advantage here is if we decide to add another conference, it's just a matter of entering in another record, and we've got that. So table number 1 is done. Let's close this one, and we'll hit yes. We want to save that, and my conference table is set up. So now I've got to create another table, and this one is going to be for the divisions. So I'll click on Create. I want to go to Table. I'm going to change the view, just like we did the last time. This table name is going to be for division. Hit OK. I've got my primary key because it's got the little key indicator there. This one we'll call it the div code, div abbreviation. We'll stick with code. The data type, we're going to make this short text. And for the divisions, there are 6 divisions in the NBA: the Atlantic, the Central, the Southeast, the Northwest, Pacific, and Southwest Conference. So we want to come up with some sort of abbreviation for them. I don't want to use just one character, because if I had one character, then I run into a problem with the Southeast versus the Southwest. Which one gets an S? Which one gets something else? I don't want to. If I gave Southwest a W, well, then what happens to Northwest? I got all that kind of stuff. So, even though you don't really need this many characters, I would probably set it just at 3 characters. And it makes a nice abbreviation for it. We'll put in for the description, it's the primary key. It's the unique, we'll call it PK, capital. It's the unique character code for each division. And let's see, I need a caption. So for the caption, we'll just make it div. For the format, I want to display these all the time as uppercase, so I'm going to put in a greater than sign there. And I've got my first field done. Next, what I want to do is I want to add in the division name, make it short text. Longest one, let's see, probably southwest, northwest. They each have 9 characters, so again, we can make this 12 characters, we can make it 10 characters, 15 characters. It won't hurt if you go a little bit over. And we'll just either call this div name with a space in between there, or you could just call it division, which would be fine. It's a non-key field, the division name. And then finally, our third field that we want to add in here is I want to know which conference these divisions are part of. So I'm going to put in div conf for the division conference. Now my conference is short text. It's just one character, I know that. And I'm going to put in for my caption conf. But this field happens to be what we call a foreign key. And by foreign key, this is kind of the whole magic part of a relational database. I'm going to connect both these two tables together. And the connection is this foreign key. It's going to link back to my conference table. So I'm going to say that it's going to be the link to the conference table. And I'll show you how that's going to work in just a minute. We're going to click back on the data type. So I've got short text, long text, number, blah, 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 blah. Keep all the way down here. Down at the bottom, there's a data type that's called the lookup wizard. Now, it isn't really a separate kind of data. In this case, what it's going to do is it's going to store it as short text, but we're going to build a whole table connection or I guess a lookup connection to our conference table. So I'm going to choose that. And it says, this wizard creates a lookup field which displays a list of values you can choose from. How do you want to look it up in this? Do you want to look this up in another table or query, or do you want to type in the values that you want? My suggestion, never do this, where you type in the values that you want. I think it's always better to create a separate table, even if you're just doing something like yes and no. That might be the one exception. And in fact, there's a different kind of field that you can use for that called a Boolean. But, you always want to set it up where you can just add more stuff to a table or delete entries out of a table. And that way it automatically updates it for all the rest of these. So pretty much always choose option 1, and that's the way you should build your databases. So hit next. It says which table or query is going to provide the values. We're going to grab this from the conference table. So I'll hit next there. It says which fields do contain the values that I want to include as part of this. In this case, I want to see both the code and I want to see the name. Notice that there's these double arrows. That basically takes all the fields all at once. So I could have just clicked on that instead of clicking twice on the other one. But in this case, yeah, we want both these fields. That'll be fine. Hit next. Then it says, what sort order do you want it? It's always a good idea to sort your records. And if you can, sort them by the primary key of that table, by conference code. If I sort by the primary key, I don't need to sort by anything else because it's already a unique field. So, don't waste computer resources and choose another field. We've already got this here for the primary key. So hit next. Now in this part of the lookup wizard, it says how wide do you want the columns to look, and we can also hide the key column. Normally, I will tell you uncheck that. Don't hide it. The only time you want to do that is if you have an auto number field or something that's hard for users to remember what it is. But in this case, I want the users just to be able to quickly type in E's and W's, and that's it, and I want them to see those fields. Kind of like Excel, you can click and drag and move this around a little bit. It's one of those, you almost have to shrink them down first and then try to make it a little bit wider, because otherwise, for some reason, it always seems to chop off the size of the table. And I don't know if it's just something I'm doing wrong or it's a bugaboo with Microsoft, but I'll try to make these things a little bit wider than what the default might be. So I'll hit next here. Then it goes through a long paragraph that says when I select a row in the lookup field, I can store a value. What value or what field do you want to store? Well, I just want to store that one character, either the E or the W. That'll be fine. I don't want to store the entire name here. So I'll leave that, hit next. Then it says, what label do you want? This is the label I gave it in the first place, so I want to choose that. Then you've got a couple other boxes that you can check or uncheck. The default is uncheck, and it's the right default. You can enable data integrity, and what that means is for each one of the divisions, it has to belong to either the East or the West. There's another way to set this up, and by doing it this other way, you won't run into problems. If for some reason you already had entered in some data and you had a mistake in it and you try to check this, it's basically going to cancel out this whole lookup wizard and you got to start all over again. So don't check that. The allow multiple values, that would say a division could belong to multiple conferences, and normally that's bad database design. You always want to have one-to-many relationships, not many-to-many, and that's what this would let you do, is do many-to-many relationships, and usually that, as I say, it's bad database design. Don't do it. Hit finish. It says the table has to be saved, so I will hit yes, and voila, I guess it's done. So let's change the view. We'll type in our division. The first one is ATL. It's the Atlantic division, and when I come to conference, I get this nice little drop-down box that lets me choose either the Eastern or the Western Conference. Now I could just type in an E, or you can choose it from that drop-down box. So we've got the Atlantic Division. We'll type in CEN for the Central. And that again is the Eastern Conference. Let's put in NW for the Northwest. And that is part of the Western Conference. And let's double click here, let's double click here, let's double click here between those columns. That looks good. We can decide if we want these divisions in any particular order, but this will be fine if they're alphabetized like that. We'll worry about some other tricks later. So that looks good. Let's close this one up. And it says, do you want to save it? Yes, I do. All right, so far so good. We've got two tables. We've got a relationship between them. I want to check this out. So up on my different tabs, I've got the Home tab, Create, External Data. You want to look for this one that says Database Tools. And in Database Tools, choose Relationships. And in my relationships, it's already got the two tables that I just created. Now, if you open this up and you don't see all your tables, you just have to click on the Show Table box, and you can add in all the tables that you need to. All right, so I don't need to add any more. That looks fine. Notice there's a little line connecting these two tables. Connects it between the conference code and the division code. If you move this around, the line stretches. So you can see how that kind of works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click once on that line, and I can either choose Edit Relationships, or if you double click it, it will do the same thing. It starts up the Edit Relationships. Now this is what I was talking about as far as the integrity part of it. I could have done it in the lookup wizard. Bad place to do it. Here's where you want to try to do it. Come into Database Tools, go to Edit Relationships, double click on the line here, and you want to enforce referential integrity. So each of those divisions has to belong to a legitimate conference, either the East or the West. The next field down here where it says Cascade Update Related Fields, the reason I'll do that is if for some reason I rename the Eastern Conference to something different. I'm brain dead. I can't think of something different. But let's just call it the main conference with the letter M. If I do that and change it in my conference table, it will automatically update in the division tables and change all those E's to an M. The last one, cascade delete related records, that one normally we don't want to click it because here's kind of the danger. If I would go into the conference code, delete out the Eastern Division, it's automatically going to delete out all my divisions and I lose all that information. So, usually you don't want to just lose all that stuff. You want to rename it, shift it to someplace else first. So I normally will leave that unchecked. Then finally at the bottom it says the relationship is one to many. That's good, that's what we want. We'll hit OK. And now I've got these symbols 1 to infinity. One conference can have an infinite number of different divisions. Certainly it could have more than 3 if we really so chose. So I've got that done. I'm going to close this up and hit yes, I want to save it. So couple tables, that looks good. We can open them up. Here's the conference table. There's the division table. All right, so that stuff's working. I want to close those tables up. And I'll show you one other trick that we can do that is somewhat useful once we have this set up. I'm going to go to Conference and just click once on Conference. Then I'm going to click on Create. And I want to create a new form. And when I do that, it automatically generates a form here. It's got the conference, and I've got my divisions within it. So I'm going to change this ever so slightly. I'm going to say that this, I'm going to click up here once, twice, and say that this is going to be divisions by conference, is the name of my form. You could try moving some of the stuff around, but at this point, we're not worried about making it look beautiful. We're just trying to get some functionality done. And I'm going to close this up. It prompts me to save it, so I'll choose yes. And my form is going to be called divs by conference or divisions by conference. Divisions by conference. That'll be fine. Hit OK. So I've got 2 tables and I've got a form to let me enter in some data. So let's double click on divisions by conference. I've got the Atlantic, the Central, and the SE, the Southeast Conference. I'm going to come down here at the bottom, go over to the Western Conference. We've got the Northwest. I've got the PAC, Pacific, and the SW, the Southwest, and we're good. All right, I'm just going to click kind of outside of that box. I've got that entered in. Close up my form, and now if you go to the division table and open it up, I suddenly have 6 records in it, and I didn't have to bother typing in the E's and W's because I had that as part of the form. So it saves me just a little bit of time, and we can work with some things like that. So in just about 25 minutes, we're able to really get a pretty good start on our database. So that worked out well. We've got a form created. Next, what we're going to be coming back and doing is we're going to add in some more tables to try to set up our whole database, and then we'll start getting into some more queries, some more forms, and eventually reports, and do some of that. So until next time, we'll see you then.